Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle and into the massive docking bay of Nexus Station. The metal floor beneath his feet vibrated with the hum of countless alien machines and the footsteps of beings he had only seen in videos back. On Earth, the air smelled different here, thick with unfamiliar scents that made his nose twitch. He adjusted his diplomatic uniform and picked up his single bag, trying to look more confident than he felt. The station stretched out before him like a small city floating in space. Curved walls rose hundreds of feet above his head, covered in strange symbols that glowed with soft blue light. Alien beings moved through the wide corridors in groups, their voices creating a constant buzz of different languages and sounds. Some walked on two legs like humans, others crawled on multiple limbs, and a few seemed to float just above the ground. A tall, thin alien with gray skin and large black eyes approached him. The creature wore what looked like an official uniform, with multiple badges and symbols. "You are the human diplomat Jake Morrison," it said in perfect English, though its voice had a strange musical quality to it. "I am Quindle of the Zentari. I will show you to your quarters." Jake nodded and followed the alien through the busy corridors. As they walked, he noticed other beings stopping to stare at him. Some pointed with whatever they used for hands. Others made clicking or chirping sounds that might have been laughter. A group of insect-like creatures with 4 arms and sharp claws watched him pass with what seemed like amusement in their multifaceted eyes. "The minor species section is located in the lower levels," Quindle explained as they entered a large elevator. "All newly discovered civilizations are housed there until they prove their worth to the Galactic Council." The elevator descended. For what felt like several minutes, passing level after level of the massive station, when the doors opened, Jake saw a much different environment than the grand entrance hall above. The corridors here were narrower, the lighting dimmer, and the walls made of plain metal instead of the decorative materials he had seen earlier. It reminded him of the difference between first class and economy seating on an airplane. "Your quarters are here," Quindle said, stopping at a door marked with human symbols. "The dining hall is down the corridor to your left. The meeting rooms are to your right. Try not to wander into areas marked for other species. Some of them do not appreciate unexpected visitors." Jake's quarters were small but functional. A bed that seemed designed for human proportions, a desk with a computer terminal, and a small bathroom. On the desk was a thick manual titled Diplomatic, Protocols for Minor Species, and a schedule for the next day's meetings. He sat down and opened the manual, trying to understand the complex hierarchy of the galactic community he was now part of. The next morning, Jake made his way to the dining hall. The space was divided into sections based on species, with each group having their own area with appropriate food and seating. The human section was tiny, consisting of just 2 tables near the back corner. He wasn't surprised to find he was the only human there at this early hour. As he ate his breakfast of familiar Earth foods that had been shipped to the station, Jake observed the other species around him. The insect-like beings he had seen yesterday were called Vorthok, according to his manual. They made loud clicking sounds as they ate what looked like chunks of raw meat. At another table, massive furry creatures that resembled bears but stood 8 feet tall were crushing bones between their teeth. The manual identified them as Gorlin. "So you are the human," said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see a Vorthok standing near his table. The creature was about his height but much thinner, with 4 arms ending in sharp claws and large compound eyes that seemed to look in multiple directions at once. "I am Ziktar, warrior of the Vorthok Hive. I have heard much about your species." "Nice to meet you," Jake replied, standing up and extending his hand in greeting. The Vorthok looked at his hand with what might have been confusion, then made a series of rapid clicking sounds that attracted attention from other nearby aliens. "It offers its manipulator appendage," Ziktar said loudly enough for others to hear. "How curious. On my world, we would interpret this as either a challenge to combat or an offering of food." More clicking sounds came from the other Vorthok, and Jake realized they were laughing at him. A deep, rumbling voice joined the conversation. "The soft skin amuses us," said one of the bear-like Gorlin as it approached their table. Jake had to look up to meet its eyes, which were small and dark and a face full of sharp teeth. I am Gronak. Your species is even smaller than the reports indicated. Humans are average height where we come from, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. The Gorlin was intimidating, but he had been trained for these situations. Average for prey animals, perhaps? Gronak replied with what sounded like amusement. Tell me, human, what weapons do you carry? I see no claws, no natural armor, no poison glands. How do you defend yourselves? Jake was about to explain human technology and weapons when Ziktar interrupted. They use primitive tools, the Vorthak said dismissively. Metal sticks that make loud noises. Very crude compared to our bioweapons or the energy shields of the Zentari. Fascinating, said another voice. A Zentari had approached their gathering, its large eyes studying Jake with scientific interest. The human shows no fear response despite being surrounded by natural predators. Most prey species would have fled or submitted by now. We're not prey, Jake said firmly. Humans are actually quite capable of defending themselves. This statement caused an eruption of various sounds that Jake interpreted as laughter. The Vorthak clicked rapidly, the Gorlin made deep rumbling noises, and even the usually polite Zentari seemed to find his words amusing. Capable, Gronak repeated still. Rumbling with amusement. Yes, I am sure you are very dangerous with your soft skin and tiny teeth. Tell me, human, have you ever killed anything larger than yourself? Jake thought about the wars in human history, the hunting traditions of his own ancestors, the fact that humans had conquered every environment on Earth, but looking at these aliens with their natural weapons and obvious physical advantages, he wondered if his species really was as capable as he believed. I can see the doubt in your eyes, Ziktar observed. Your species knows its place in the natural order. That is good. It will make integration easier. As the aliens dispersed to continue their meals, Jake sat back down at his table. He had known this assignment would be challenging, but he hadn't expected to feel so small and vulnerable. The other species seemed to view humans as some kind of curiosity at best, or prey at worst. He finished his breakfast in silence, aware that other beings throughout the dining hall were still watching him and making comments in their various languages. Tomorrow he would have to present humanity's case for membership in the Galactic Trade Consortium. Based on this morning's reception, he wasn't optimistic about their chances, but as he walked back to his quarters, Jake noticed something odd. In the upper levels of the station, visible through the transparent ceiling of the dining hall, he could see shapes moving in the darkness, large shapes that seemed to glide rather than walk. According to his manual, those upper levels were restricted to the Korath, a species about which very little information was available. The few details he could find described them as ancient and powerful, but the other species seemed reluctant to discuss them. Perhaps, Jake thought, there were bigger predators in this galaxy than the ones who had been mocking him at breakfast. Jake Morrison stood at the entrance of the Grand Assembly Hall, his hands slightly damp with nervous sweat. The massive room stretched out before him like an amphitheater, with curved rows of seats rising toward a domed ceiling that displayed a holographic image of the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species filled the seats, their various forms creating a bizarre rainbow of colors, shapes, and sizes. The air hummed with the sound of different languages being translated through universal communicators. Lisa Carter, his fellow diplomat, stood beside him carrying the presentation materials they had prepared for weeks. She was younger than Jake, fresh out of the diplomatic academy, and her face showed the same mixture of excitement and terror that he felt. They had trained for this moment for months, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of addressing the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Remember, Lisa whispered, we just need to convince them that humans can contribute to galactic trade. We don't need to impress them, just show them we're worth basic trading rights. Jake nodded, though he wasn't sure how convincing they would be after yesterday's encounters in the dining hall. Word of his meeting with the Vorthak and Gorlin had apparently spread throughout the station. As they walked down the aisle toward the speaker's platform, He could hear whispers and see pointing gestures from the alien delegates, the Zentari moderator, a tall being with flowing robes and ceremonial jewelry, called the session to order. The Galactic Trade Consortium will now hear the petition of the human species for basic trading privileges, it announced in a voice that echoed through the hall. Representative Jake Morrison of Earth will present their case. Jake walked to the center of the circular platform, feeling hundreds of alien eyes watching his every move. He activated the holographic display system and began his presentation. Images of Earth appeared in the air around him, showing human cities, technology, and resources that might be of interest to galactic traders. Honored delegates, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's sound system. Humanity seeks to join the galactic community as peaceful traders and partners. Our world offers unique resources including precious metals, organic compounds, and cultural products that could benefit all species. He showed images of human art, music, and literature, hoping to demonstrate that humans had something valuable to contribute beyond raw materials. The audience seemed politely interested, though Jake noticed that some of the more aggressive species, like the Vorthok and Gorlin, appeared to be paying more attention to him than to his presentation. Human technology may seem primitive by galactic standards, Jake continued, but we have developed efficient methods for resource extraction and manufacturing that could be scaled up for galactic trade. Our species is also highly adaptable and eager to learn from our galactic neighbors. The presentation was going better than he had expected until he reached the section about human military capabilities. He had included this to show that humans could defend their trade routes if necessary, but the reaction was not what he had hoped for. Video footage of human soldiers, tanks, and aircraft appeared in the holographic display. Jake watched as the alien audience began to react with what he was learning to recognize as amusement. The Vorthak delegation started their rapid clicking sounds, while the Gorlin made deep rumbling noises that shook the floor. "These are your warriors?" Ziktar's voice cut through the noise as the insectoid being stood up in his section. "They carry primitive projectile weapons and hide behind metal shells. How do they expect to survive in a galaxy full of real predators?" The laughter grew louder as more species joined in. Jake tried to continue his presentation, but the disruption was making it impossible to focus. He looked toward Lisa, who was watching the scene with growing horror. "Perhaps the humans should show us these primitive weapons in action," Gronak's booming voice added to the chaos. The massive Gorlin was standing now, his 8-foot frame towering over the other delegates in his section. "We would be curious to see how their metal sticks perform against natural weapons." The Zentari moderator tried to restore order, but the damage was done. The formal presentation had become a comedy show with humans as the entertainment. Jake felt his face burning with embarrassment as he watched months of preparation being dismissed as a joke. "If I may address the assembly," said a smooth voice from the upper sections. Jake looked up to see a Zentari in more elaborate robes than the others. According to his briefing materials, this was Veltar, one of the most influential diplomats in the consortium. "I believe we may be approaching this matter incorrectly." The hall gradually grew quiet as Veltar stood to speak. "The question is not whether humans can contribute to galactic trade," he said in a tone that suggested deep thought. "The question is whether they can survive long enough to be reliable trading partners." This statement caused a new wave of discussion throughout the hall. Jake realized that Veltar was not defending humanity, but rather questioning their basic survival capabilities. "Look at them," Veltar continued, gesturing toward Jake and Lisa. "No natural armor, no claws, no poison, no advanced technology. They are soft and vulnerable. How long would human trade missions last in the dangerous regions of the galaxy where the most valuable resources are found?" Jake stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Humans have survived and thrived in every environment on our planet," he said firmly. "We have adapted to extremes of temperature, pressure, and hostile conditions. We are more resilient than we appear." "Resilient?" Ziktar repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yes, I am sure you are very resilient until you meet something with real teeth and claws." Tell me, human, what is the largest predator on your world? Jake thought about bears, sharks, and big cats. Compared to the aliens in this room, Earth's predators suddenly seemed very small. We have various large predators, he said weakly. Various large predators? Gronak repeated with amusement. I weigh 4 times what you weigh, and I am considered average size among my people. Our children hunt creatures larger than your largest. Predators for sport. The laughter returned even louder than before. Jake felt completely helpless as he watched his species being dismissed as weaklings who belonged in some kind of galactic zoo rather than as trading partners. I propose a solution, Veltar announced, raising his hand for silence. Rather than granting humans full trading privileges, perhaps we should offer them protected status. They could be assigned to safe sectors under the protection of more capable species. This would allow them to participate in galactic commerce without exposing them to dangers they cannot handle. The suggestion was met with approval from many delegates. Jake realized with growing horror that they were being offered charity rather than partnership. Humans would become the galactic equivalent of a protected endangered species. We don't need protection, Jake said, his voice rising with frustration. Humans are capable of defending themselves and competing in galactic trade. Of course you are, Veltar replied in a tone one might use with a child. But why take unnecessary risks? Under protection, humans could slowly learn about galactic realities while contributing what they can safely contribute. Lisa stepped forward to help, but Jake could see in her eyes that she was just as overwhelmed as he was. Their mission was failing completely, and there seemed to be nothing they could do to change the aliens' perception of humanity as weak and helpless. As the debate continued around them, Jake noticed something strange. The lighting in the hall flickered for just a moment, and he felt a subtle change in air pressure that made his ears pop. Several of the more sensitive aliens looked upward toward the ceiling, their expressions showing what might have been nervousness. The moment passed quickly, and the debate resumed. But Jake found himself wondering about those upper levels of the station where the mysterious Korath lived. If these aliens were afraid of something, perhaps humans weren't the weakest species in the galaxy after all. Jake Morrison sat in his quarters late into the night, staring at his computer screen. The presentation had been a disaster, and he knew that tomorrow would bring even more humiliation as the consortium delegates voted on humanity's status. The protected species proposal seemed certain to pass, which would make humans the galactic equivalent of pets rather than partners. He had spent hours searching through the station's database, looking for any information that might help him understand how to improve humanity's position. Most of the files were restricted or written in languages his translator couldn't handle properly. But one thing kept appearing in his searches, mentioned in brief references and incomplete reports: the Korath. Every database entry about the Korath was heavily classified, but Jake had managed to piece together fragments of information. They were described as ancient, powerful, and dangerous. Other species spoke of them with a mixture of fear and respect that he had never heard directed toward any other race. The Korath controlled the upper levels of Nexus Station, and according to what little he could find, they had been the dominant power in the galaxy for millions of years. What puzzled Jake was why such a powerful species would withdraw from active galactic politics. The record suggested that the Korath had once ruled vast territories across multiple star systems, but had gradually pulled back to a few key locations like Nexus Station. They still maintained their territories, but they no longer engaged in the day-to-day business of galactic governance. A soft chime from his door interrupted his research. Jake opened it to find Lisa Carter standing in the corridor, looking as tired and frustrated as he felt. She entered his quarters without waiting for an invitation and collapsed into the spare chair. "I've been thinking about what happened today," Lisa said, rubbing her eyes. "There has to be something we're missing. The way they laughed at us, it was like they knew something we didn't." Jake nodded, closing his computer. "I've been researching the other species, trying to understand their perspective. Most of them evolved as either predators or prey animals. The Vorthak are natural hunters. The Gorlan are apex predators on their world. Even the Zentari have defensive capabilities we don't have. So they look at us and see prey, Lisa concluded. No natural weapons, no armor, no obvious defensive abilities. From their perspective, we probably do look helpless. That's what I thought too, Jake replied. But then I started reading about the Korath. They're different from all the others. The database entries are mostly classified, but from what I can gather, they're the real apex predators of this galaxy. Lisa leaned forward with interest. What kind of predators? I don't know exactly, Jake admitted. But every species in this station is afraid of them. The Vorthak who laughed at us today, the Gorlan who called us soft, they all speak of the Korath in whispers. Whatever they are, they're dangerous enough that everyone else gives them the entire upper section of the station. They were interrupted by a commotion in the corridor outside. Jake opened his door to see several Vorthak warriors moving through the hallway, their forearms clicking with excitement. He recognized one of them as part of Ziktar S group from the dining hall. What's happening? Lisa asked, joining him at the door. One of the Vorthak noticed them watching. We go to prove Vorthak superiority, it announced proudly. The soft shells are not the only ones who can be mocked. We will show the galaxy that Vorthak fear nothing. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Where are you going? To the upper levels, the Vorthak replied with clicking sounds that Jake had learned meant laughter. The mysterious Korath have hidden too long. Time to see if they are as dangerous as the stories claim. That's not a good idea, Jake started to say, but the Vorthak were already moving down the corridor. He watched them enter the elevator that led to the upper levels of the station, their voices echoing with excitement and bravado. Lisa grabbed his arm. Should we warn someone? Jake thought about it for a moment. The Vorthak had spent the day humiliating him and his species. Part of him wanted to let them discover whatever was waiting in the upper levels. But another part of him, the part that had been trained in diplomacy and conflict resolution, knew that violence would only make things worse for everyone. I'll contact station security, he said, moving toward his computer. But when he tried to access the security systems, he found that his diplomatic clearance wasn't high enough to reach the upper-level monitors. The entire section was blocked from his access. They waited in Jake's quarters for news, but none came. An hour passed, then two. Jake tried calling the main Vorthak delegation, but got no response. Lisa attempted to contact station administration, but Quindle was apparently unavailable. Finally, Jake decided to investigate personally. Against Lisa's protests, he made his way to the elevator that led to the upper levels. The corridor was empty now, with no sign of the Vorthak warriors who had passed through earlier. When he tried to call the elevator, it responded normally, but when he pressed the button for the upper levels, nothing happened. Access denied, a mechanical voice announced. Upper levels restricted to authorized personnel only. Jake tried his diplomatic codes, but they were rejected. He was about to give up when he noticed something odd. The elevator doors were slightly damaged, with scratches that looked like they had been made by claws. The metal was scored in patterns that suggested something large and sharp had tried to force its way through. He returned to his quarters to find Lisa pacing nervously. Any luck? No, Jake replied, but he didn't mention the scratches. The upper levels are completely restricted. I can't even get the elevator to respond. They spent the rest of the night waiting for some kind of news or explanation, but the station remained eerily quiet. No announcements, no emergency signals, no reports of missing Vorthak. It was as if the warriors had simply vanished. The next morning, Jake went to the dining hall for breakfast. The Vorthak section was noticeably empty, with only a few individuals who looked nervous and kept glancing toward the ceiling. When Jake approached one of them, the alien quickly moved away without speaking. Gronak, the large Gorlan, was at his usual table, but even he seemed subdued. Jake noticed that the massive alien kept looking upward, as if expecting something to appear from above. Interesting night, Jake said, sitting at his usual table. Gronak's small eyes focused on him. You know nothing about last night, human. The Gorlan said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. And you will ask no questions about it. Some Vorthak warriors were talking about visiting the upper levels. Jake continued, pretending not to notice the aliens' discomfort. I haven't seen them this morning. The upper levels are forbidden for good reason, Gronak replied, his voice getting even quieter. Some lessons are learned too late. Before Jake could ask more questions, Quindle appeared at his table. The Zentari administrator looked more nervous than usual, his large eyes darting around the room as if checking for listeners. Human Jake Morrison, Quindle said in a voice that trembled slightly. You will ask no questions about missing persons. You will not investigate restricted areas. You will not discuss the upper levels with other species. This is for your own safety. What happened to the Vorthak? Jake asked directly. Quindle's reaction was immediate and terrifying. The normally calm alien began shaking, his gray skin turning an even paler shade. The Korath handle their own security, he whispered. We do not ask questions, we do not investigate. We do not even speak of what we might have heard. The administrator hurried away, leaving Jake alone with his breakfast and a growing certainty that he had stumbled onto something much more dangerous than he had imagined. The upper levels held secrets that the entire station was afraid to acknowledge, and somehow those secrets were connected to the mysterious Ko or Rathdot as he ate. Jake noticed that the usual sounds of the station seemed muted today. Conversations were quieter, movements more cautious. It was as if the entire population was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen or hoping that nothing would, looking up through the transparent ceiling toward the upper levels. Jake could see shadows moving in the darkness above, large shadows that seemed to glide rather than walk, just as he had noticed on his first day. Whatever lived up there, it was powerful enough to make every other species in the galaxy afraid to even speak about it. And somehow, Jake realized, humanity's fate might depend on understanding what that power really was. Jake Morrison was finishing his morning meal when the emergency alarms began blaring throughout Nexus Station. The sound was unlike anything he had heard before, a deep pulsing tone that seemed to vibrate through the metal floors and walls. All around the dining hall, aliens of every species stopped what they were doing and looked toward the ceiling with expressions of concern. A voice echoed through the station's communication system, speaking in the formal tone of official announcements. All diplomatic personnel report to emergency assembly immediately. This is not a drill. All diplomatic personnel report to emergency assembly immediately. Jake found Lisa Carter waiting for him outside the dining hall, her face pale with worry. What do you think happened? She asked as they joined the stream of aliens moving toward the main assembly hall. I don't know, Jake replied. But he had a sick feeling in his stomach that whatever was happening might be connected to the missing Vorthak from the night before. The atmosphere on the station had been tense all morning, and now it seemed like everyone's worst fears were coming true. The assembly hall was packed with representatives from every species on the station. Jake noticed that the Vorthak section was still mostly empty, with only a few nervous-looking individuals scattered among the seats. The Gorlan delegation looked grim, and even the usually calm Zentari appeared agitated. Quindle stood at the center of the speaking platform, his gray skin almost white with stress. Behind him, a holographic display showed what appeared to be security footage from somewhere in the station's lower levels. Jake squinted at the image but couldn't make out the details from his seat. Honored delegates, Quindle began, his voice shaking slightly. We have discovered the body of Gorlan trader Brunak in the lower maintenance section of the station. Initial examination indicates that he was killed by weapons consistent with human technology. A shocked silence fell over the assembly hall. Jake felt his blood turn cold as he processed what the administrator had just said. He looked at Lisa, who was staring at him with wide eyes filled with disbelief. The holographic display changed to show close-up images of the crime scene. Jake could see a massive Gorlan body lying motionless among pipes and machinery. Dark stains covered the metal floor around the corpse, and there were burn marks on the walls that looked like they could have been made by plasma weapons. The energy signatures match human plasma technology, Quindle continued. The pattern of wounds suggests human combat techniques. Security recordings show human-sized figures in the area at the time of death. Gronach stood up in the Gorlan section, his enormous frame shaking with rage. "This proves what we have suspected all along," he roared. "These soft shells are not weak prey animals. They are sneaky predators who kill from the shadows like cowards." The accusation hit Jake like a physical blow. He stood up without thinking, his voice carrying across the hall. "Humans did not kill anyone. We don't even have weapons on this station. Our diplomatic immunity specifically prohibits us from carrying any kind of armaments." "Then explain the evidence?" Ziktar's voice cut through the noise. The Vorthik leader was one of the few of his species present, and his compound eyes were fixed on Jake with obvious hostility. Human weapons, human tactics, human-sized attackers. What other explanation could there be? Jake's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. The evidence did seem damning, but he knew that neither he nor Lisa had left their quarters during the night. More importantly, they had no reason to kill a Gorlan traitor they had never even met. "We demand immediate justice," Gronach declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "These treacherous humans must be expelled from the station and banned from the galaxy. They have shown their true nature as assassins and murderers." Other voices joined in from around the assembly hall. Species that had been merely dismissive of humans the day before were now calling for their immediate removal. Jake realized with growing horror that they were being set up, but he had no idea who was behind it or why. Veltar stood up in the Zentari section, raising his hand for silence. "While we must certainly investigate this crime thoroughly, we should not rush to judgment. Perhaps there are other explanations for what appears to be human involvement." "What other explanations?" Gronach demanded. "The evidence is clear. The humans killed Brunak to send a message that they are not as helpless as they appear." Jake felt the situation spiraling completely out of control. The other delegates were talking among themselves in their various languages, but he could sense the mood of the assembly turning increasingly hostile. Lisa grabbed his arm, her grip tight with fear. "Jake," she whispered, "we need to get out of here. This is getting dangerous." Before Jake could respond, Quindle called for order. "The Council of Species will convene an emergency session to determine the appropriate response to this situation. The human delegates will be confined to their quarters pending investigation." "Confined?" Jake protested. "We have diplomatic immunity. You can't just imprison us without proof." "Diplomatic immunity does not extend to murder," Veltar replied smoothly. "Under galactic law, suspected criminals can be detained regardless of their official status." Security personnel from multiple species began moving toward Jake and Lisa. The sight of armed Vorthak and Gorlan approaching made Jake's survival instincts kick in. He looked around the assembly hall, searching for any way to escape or defend themselves. "Wait," he called out, his voice carrying over the growing chaos. "If humans really did this, then why would we be stupid enough to use our own weapons? Why would we leave evidence that points directly to us? Doesn't that seem strange to anyone?" The question caused some hesitation among the approaching security forces. A few of the more thoughtful delegates began murmuring among themselves as if considering Jake's point for the first time. "Because humans are primitive and careless," Ziktar replied with clicking sounds of contempt. "They think their crude weapons make them dangerous, but they lack the intelligence to cover their tracks properly." Jake realized that arguing was pointless. The aliens had already made up their minds based on the evidence they had been shown. Whatever was really happening, someone had gone to great lengths to make it look like humans were responsible for. The Gorlan's death. As the security forces closed in, Jake made a desperate decision. "I invoke the right of investigation," he announced loudly. Under diplomatic protocols, accused parties have the right to examine evidence and conduct their own investigation before formal charges are filed. Quindle looked uncertain, consulting with other administrators on the platform. "The right of investigation is rarely used," he said finally, "and it carries significant risks." "What kind of risks?" Lisa asked. "If your investigation fails to prove your innocence within 48 hours, the charges become final and non-appealable," Veltar explained. You would be permanently expelled from the galaxy and forbidden from ever returning. Jake looked at Lisa, seeing his own desperation reflected in her eyes. They both knew that staying confined to their quarters would only delay the inevitable. The evidence against them seemed too strong to overcome through normal diplomatic channels. We accept the risk, Jake said firmly. We demand the right to investigate this crime ourselves. The assembly hall erupted in discussion as the various species debated this unexpected development. Jake had bought them some time, but he knew it wouldn't be enough unless they could find real proof of their innocence. As he stood waiting for the council's decision, Jake found himself looking up toward the ceiling of the assembly hall. Through the transparent material, he could see the dark shapes moving in the upper levels, just as he had noticed before. The Korath were up there, watching everything that happened in their station. An idea began forming in Jake's mind, desperate and probably suicidal, but possibly their only chance. If the evidence had been planted to frame humans, then someone on this station was working very hard to make sure humanity never gained acceptance in the galactic community. And if the Korath really were the apex predators everyone feared, they might be the only ones powerful enough to see through the deception. The council finished their deliberations and Quindle announced their decision. The humans will be granted 48 hours to conduct their investigation. If they cannot prove their innocence by that time, they will be permanently expelled from galactic space. Jake nodded, accepting the terms even though he knew the odds were impossible. But as the assembly began to disperse, he was already planning his next move. The restricted upper levels held secrets that everyone on the station was afraid to face, but Jake was running out of options. Sometimes he thought, when you're already condemned, the only choice left is to risk everything on the most dangerous gamble possible. Jake Morrison stood outside the restricted elevator for the third time in 2 days, but this time he wasn't going to let security protocols stop him. Lisa Carter paced behind him, wringing her hands with nervous energy as she watched him work on the control panel. "This is insane," Lisa whispered, glancing around the empty corridor. "Even if you manage to get up there, what makes you think the Korath will help us? They might just kill you on sight." Jake paused in his work with the elevator controls. "Because someone on this station wants humans gone badly enough to commit murder and plant evidence. The only beings powerful enough to see through that kind of deception are the ones everyone else is afraid of." He had spent the last 6 hours investigating the crime scene and reviewing security footage, but everything pointed back to human involvement. The plasma burns were consistent with Earth technology, the attack patterns matched human military training, and the timing coincided perfectly with when he and Lisa were supposed to be sleeping. Someone had planned this frame-up very carefully. "What? If the Korath are the ones behind this?" Lisa asked. "What if they're the ones who want us gone?" "Then we're dead anyway," Jake replied, finally managing to bypass the elevator security system. "But I don't think they are." "If the Korath wanted humans eliminated, they wouldn't need to frame us for murder. They could just do it themselves." The elevator doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing an interior that was larger and more ornate than the standard lifts in the lower levels. The walls were covered with dark metal that seemed to absorb light, and strange symbols glowed with a faint red luminescence. Jake stepped inside, his heart pounding as he realized there was no turning back. "Jake," Lisa called as the doors began to close, "be careful up there. If you don't come back, I'll tell everyone what really happened." The elevator rose smoothly and silently, carrying Jake higher into the station than any human had ever gone. Through the transparent walls, he could see the levels passing by below, growing smaller and smaller until even the main assembly hall looked tiny. The journey seemed to take forever, but finally the elevator came to a stop with a barely perceptible vibration. The doors opened to reveal a corridor unlike anything Jake had seen on the station. The ceiling was at least 30 feet high, and the walls were made of the same dark metal as the elevator interior. Soft red lighting provided just enough illumination to see by, creating long shadows that seemed to move and shift as he walked. The Air was different here too, thicker and warmer, with a smell that reminded Jake of old leather and something else he couldn't identify. Every footstep echoed despite the apparent sound-dampening properties of the walls. He felt like he was walking through the heart of some ancient predator as he moved deeper into the upper levels. Jake began to notice details that confirmed his suspicions about the Korath. The corridors were designed for beings much larger than any species he had encountered on the station. Doorways were twice his height, and what appeared to be furniture was sized for creatures that would dwarf even the massive Gorlan. Strange artwork covered some of the walls, depicting scenes that Jake struggled to understand. Some showed what looked like hunting scenes, with shadowy figures pursuing prey across alien landscapes. Others seemed to show battles between different species, with the Korath always emerging victorious. The artistic style was both beautiful and terrifying, combining elegant curves with images of violence and dominance. Jake followed the main corridor toward what appeared to be the center of the upper levels. The red lighting grew brighter as he walked, and he began to hear sounds that made his skin crawl. Soft clicking noises, like claws on metal, and a low humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Finally, he reached a massive circular chamber with a dome ceiling that must have been at least 100 feet high. The room was dominated by what appeared to be a throne or ceremonial seat made from the same dark metal as everything else. And sitting on that throne was the largest living creature Jake had ever seen. The Korath was easily 12 feet tall, even while seated, with a body that combined the worst features of every predator Jake could imagine. Its skin was black as space itself, with what looked like natural armor plating covering most of its torso and limbs. 6 arms extended from its body, each ending in hands that bore claws longer than Jake's fingers, but it was the creature's head that truly terrified him. The Korath's skull was elongated and angular, with eyes that glowed with the same red light as the corridor illumination. Its mouth was filled with rows of teeth that looked designed for tearing apart anything foolish enough to get within range. Small, human, the Korath spoke, its voice like grinding stone mixed with the rumble of distant thunder. You have entered the domain of hunters without permission. Most species would flee in terror from what they see here. You do not. Jake forced himself to remain standing despite every instinct screaming at him to run. I am Jake Morrison, diplomat of the human species. I seek an audience with the Korath leadership. The massive creature leaned forward slightly, studying Jake with eyes that seemed to see right through him. I am First Hunter Vexthal, speaker for the Korath on this station. You risk death by coming here, small human. What drives you to such desperation? Jake took a deep breath and explained everything that had happened. The murder of the Gorlan trader, the planted evidence, the threat of permanent expulsion from galactic space. As he spoke, Vexthal remained perfectly still, but Jake sensed that the creature was analyzing every word he said. You believe someone on this station seeks to eliminate your species from galactic consideration, Vexthal said when Jake finished his story. And you come to us for help, despite knowing nothing about our nature or intentions? Everyone else on this station sees humans as weak prey animals, Jake replied. But I've noticed that they're all afraid of you. That suggests you see things differently than they do. For the first time, Vexthal made a sound that might have been amusement. Interesting reasoning, small human. Tell me, what do you know? About hunting? The question surprised Jake. Humans have been hunters for most of our evolutionary history. We developed tools and tactics to hunt animals much larger and stronger than ourselves. Yes, Vexthal said, his voice carrying a note of approval. Your species understands the difference between strength and power. The Vorthak are strong with their natural weapons and warrior culture. The Gorlan are strong with their size and ferocity. But strength alone does not make a successful hunter. Jake felt a glimmer of hope as he began to understand where the conversation was heading. What makes a successful hunter? Intelligence, Vexthal replied. Patience. The ability to turn any situation to your advantage. The willingness to use whatever tools are available. Most importantly, the determination to never give up, no matter how impossible the odds appear. The first hunter stood up from his throne, his full height making Jake feel like an insect by comparison. But instead of feeling threatened, Jake found himself feeling something he hadn't experienced since arriving at the station: respect from a being that clearly knew what real predators looked like. "Your species is young," Vexthel continued, beginning to pace around the chamber with movements that were both graceful and terrifying. "The others see your lack of natural weapons and assume you are prey. They mistake your soft appearance for weakness. They have not studied your history as we have." "You've studied human history?" Jake asked. "Of course," Vexthel replied. "When a new species enters our galaxy, the Korath always investigate. We have observed your kind since first contact. We know about your wars, your exploration, your refusal to accept limitations. We recognize what the others cannot see." The first hunter stopped directly in front of Jake, towering over him like a living shadow. "You were not made to be prey, small human. You were made to hunt. Your species turns everything into a weapon. Your environment, your tools, your own bodies, even your weaknesses become strengths in your hands." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what Vexthel was saying. "You think humans are predators." "I know humans are predators," Vexthel corrected. "Persistence hunters, like the Korath were millions of years ago. You do not give up. You do not surrender. You adapt and overcome every obstacle in your path. The others will learn this truth soon enough." The first hunter moved to a wall panel and activated what appeared to be a sophisticated computer system. Images and data streams flowed across multiple screens, showing information that Jake couldn't read but somehow felt was important. "The Gorlan trader was not killed by humans," Vexthel announced. "The weapon signatures were fabricated using stolen human technology. The attack patterns were programmed to mimic human combat techniques. The security recordings were altered to show human-sized figures that do not actually exist." Jake's heart leaped with hope. "You have proof?" "We have been investigating this deception since it began," Vexthel replied. "The Korath do not tolerate false accusations in our domain. The real killers are a faction of Zentari extremists who seek to prevent human integration into galactic society." Jake Morrison walked back into the Grand Assembly Hall with a confidence he had never felt before. Behind him, the massive form of First Hunter Vexthel moved through the corridors like a living shadow, his 12-foot frame making the already large hallways seem small. Every alien they passed in the corridors froze in terror, pressing themselves against the walls as the Korath leader glided past. The assembly hall fell completely silent as Vexthel entered. Jake watched as hundreds of aliens who had been laughing at humans just days before now cowered in their seats. The Vorthak clicked frantically among themselves. The Gorlan made nervous rumbling sounds, and even the usually composed Zentari seemed unable to speak. Lisa Carter stood near the diplomatic platform, her eyes wide with amazement as she saw Jake, returning not only alive but accompanied by the most feared being in the galaxy. Quendel, the Zentari administrator, looked like he might faint as Vexthel approached the speaker's platform. "Honored delegates," Vexthel's voice echoed through the hall like distant thunder. "The Korath have completed our own investigation into the death of the Gorlan trader Brunak. The evidence will now be presented." The holographic display system activated without anyone touching the controls, showing data that Jake had seen in the upper levels but couldn't read. Now, with the universal translators working at full capacity, the information became clear to everyone in the assembly. The plasma burns on the victim were created using stolen human technology, Vexthel announced. However, the energy patterns show modifications that are impossible with standard human equipment. The weapons were altered by Zentari engineers to create false signatures. Gasps and clicking sounds filled the hall as the evidence appeared on screen. Jake could see several Zentari delegates shifting nervously in their seats, including Veltar, who had been so vocal about human weakness during the previous sessions. The attack patterns attributed to human combat techniques were programmed using military databases stolen from human diplomatic files, Vexthel continued. The execution lacks the improvisation and adaptability that characterize actual human warfare. No true human warrior would fight with such predictable methods. More evidence flowed across the screens, showing detailed analysis that proved the crime scene had been carefully staged. Jake noticed that some of the Zentari delegation was trying to leave quietly, but security forces had already sealed the exits on Vexthal orders. The security recordings showing human-sized figures were digitally created using holographic projection technology. The first hunter revealed, "The figures show no life signs, no heat signatures, and no interaction with their environment. They are sophisticated illusions designed to deceive primitive sensor systems." The final piece of evidence appeared on screen, recordings from Korath surveillance systems that Jake hadn't even known existed. The images showed 3 Zentari operatives planting evidence at the crime scene, altering security systems, and disposing of the real murder weapon. The assassination of Brunak was carried out by Zentari extremists opposed to human integration into galactic society. Vexthal declared, "The conspirators are Veltar, Zenith, and Mordek of the Zentari diplomatic mission. They will face Korath justice for their crimes in our domain." Veltar stood up in the Zentari section, his usual composure completely gone. "This is impossible," he protested. "The Korath have no authority over diplomatic personnel. We demand protection under galactic law." Vexthal turned his glowing red eyes toward the Zentari diplomat, and Jake felt the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Galactic law does not protect those who commit murder in Korath territory. The first hunter said in a voice that made the metal walls vibrate, "You will surrender now or face the consequences of your defiance." The 3 accused Zentari tried to run, but they moved barely 10 feet before shadows seemed to materialize around them. Jake had never seen the other Korath move, but suddenly the conspirators were surrounded by beings even larger and more terrifying than Vexthal. The capture took less than 3 seconds. "The evidence against humans has been proven false," Vexthal announced as the Zentari conspirators were dragged away. "But this incident has revealed something far more important than their innocence." The first hunter turned to face Jake, who suddenly found himself the center of attention for the entire Galactic Assembly. "Human Jake Morrison, you entered the domain of the Korath alone and without weapons, seeking justice for your species. When faced with certain death, you chose to confront the greatest predators in the galaxy rather than accept defeat." Jake felt every eye in the assembly hall focused on him as Vexthal continued speaking. "This action demonstrates the true nature of your species. Humans are not the weak prey animals that others believe them to be. They are hunters who have temporarily forgotten their nature." The massive Korath moved to the center of the platform, his presence dominating the entire hall. "Therefore, by the ancient rights of the Korath hegemony, we formally recognize humanity as Huntalize, the first species to receive this designation in over 1,000 years." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Species throughout the assembly began talking frantically among themselves, their voices creating a chaos of different languages and sounds. Jake could see the shock and fear in their faces as they realized what had just happened. "The humans are now under Korath protection," Vexthal declared, his voice cutting through the noise. "Any attack against them will be considered an attack against us. Any insult to their honor will be answered by Korath justice. Any attempt to exclude them from galactic affairs will be met with our displeasure." Gronak, the massive Gorlan who had spent days mocking human weakness, slowly stood up in his section. "First hunter," he said in a voice much smaller than Jake had ever heard from him, "the Gorlan accept the Korath judgment. We withdraw all previous objections to human participation in galactic trade." One by one, the other species began offering similar statements. The Vorthik, who had been the most vocal about human weakness, now pledged their cooperation with human trade missions. Even the remaining Zentari delegates, clearly terrified by what had happened to their colleagues, formally apologized for their species' actions. Jake watched in amazement as the entire political situation reversed itself in a matter of minutes. Species that had been treating humans as barely worthy of protection were now competing to offer favorable trade agreements and alliance proposals. "There's one more matter to address," Vexthal said, bringing the assembly back to order. "The humans have been accused of being weak because they lack natural weapons and armor. This accusation reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes a successful predator." The first hunter gestured toward Jake. "Humans do not need natural weapons because they turn everything into a weapon. They do not need armor because they avoid situations where armor is necessary. They do not need size and strength because they use intelligence and determination to defeat larger opponents." Vexthal's words echoed through the hall as he explained what the Korath had learned from studying human history. "Your species conquered every environment on your world not through superior strength, but through superior adaptability. You survived ice ages, droughts, and natural disasters that would have destroyed most other species. You turned your own planet into a weapon when you needed to reach the stars." Jake felt a surge of pride as he listened to the first hunter describing humanity's achievements. For the first time since arriving at the station, someone was seeing humans for what they really were instead of what they appeared to be. The Korath withdraw from active galactic politics millions of years ago because we grew tired of ruling over species that could not understand true strength, Vexthal continued. We have waited for a species that could match our understanding of what it means to be a predator. Humans are that species. The assembly session concluded with the formal signing of humanity's admission to the Galactic Trade Consortium, not as a protected minor species, but as full members with the backing of the most powerful race in the galaxy. Trade agreements that would have taken years to negotiate were completed in hours, with every species eager to establish good relations with the new Korath allies. As the delegates began to leave the hall, Jake found himself standing alone with Vexthal. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't know how to repay what you've done for my species." "You have already repaid us," the first hunter replied. "You reminded us why we became hunters in the first place." The galaxy had grown soft and predictable. Now it will become interesting again. Jake left Nexus Station 3 days later with trade agreements worth trillions of credits and alliance offers from dozens of species. But more importantly, he left with the knowledge that humanity had found its place in the galaxy not by changing what they were, but by finally showing the universe their true nature. As his transport ship departed the station, Jake looked back at the upper levels where the Korath lived. Through the transparent metal, he could see the shadow of Vexthal watching their departure. The first hunter had called humans persistence hunters, and Jake realized that was exactly what they would continue to be among the stars.